There's a place I used to hunt every winter, north of Stillwater Creek, a long spine of pine-covered ridge that tapers off into seemingly endless hills. The locals call it the back shelf. Not many people go up there anymore. The trails have eroded, and the old fire roads are half swallowed by moss and blackberry vines now. It's the kind of place where the forest feels older than the maps, and I hadn't been up there in years. But late last November, I decided to take a day off work, load my gear, and hike in alone. Just me, the woods, and the slow patience that comes with small game hunting. I figured I'd set up before sunrise, find a quiet spot, wait out the day, and relax. By the time I reached the top of the ridge, the air had that glassy stillness you only get in deep forest. No wind, no birds. Even the snow muffled sound in a strange way. My boots would crunch once for every 5 steps I took. I remember thinking it felt like walking across the roof of the world, quiet, suspended, completely empty. For most of the morning, I didn't see a soul. Every now and then there was a distant echo of voices drifting through the trees. Hikers, maybe, but never close enough to see. Then, sometime after noon, the forest shifted. It was subtle at first. The light dimmed even though the sky hadn't clouded, and the quiet started pressing in against me. That's when I decided to move deeper, away from the old ridge trail and toward the heart of the pines. It didn't take long to find a spot, a patch of high ground ringed by tall spruce. Perfect for a squirrel or maybe a hare to cross through. I settled against a tree, back straight, shotgun resting on my knees, and just waited. Time blurred. Every so often, I'd make a few soft calls, then let the silence stretch. Eventually, I heard it, a faint rustling above me. I looked up and spotted a fat gray squirrel creeping along a branch about 30 yards out, too far for a clean shot. So I stayed still, tried another call, hoping to coax it closer. That's when I heard something else. An echo answered, and it wasn't mine. It came from deeper in the woods. Same call, same rhythm, just a split-second delay. Almost like it was me, but not. At first, I figured it was another hunter messing with me. I stood, waved my orange cap above the tree line, and shouted, "I'm here. Watch your fire." No reply. Only that weird echo again, my last call repeated faintly, like someone whispering it from behind the trees. I laughed it off, stretched my legs, and turned toward my pack. That was when I heard the snap. A bullet ripped past my shoulder and smacked into the trunk behind me, spraying bark across my face. For half a second, I didn't even breathe. The shot had come from the east, maybe 50 yards out. Instinct kicked in. I dove behind a fallen log, heart slamming so hard it hurt. The forest went still again except for the ringing in my ears, and I yelled, loud and furious, "Hey! I'm wearing orange, you idiot! You almost killed me!" My voice came back in fragments, bouncing between the trees. There was no answer. Nothing moved. I waited 1 minute, 5, 10. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my gun. Then I caught movement, a flicker of orange, or at least I thought it was slipping behind a cluster of trees. Someone shifting just out of sight. I called out again, this time calmer. "Hey, Are you okay? You see where your shot went, man? Nothing. Just the faint crunch of snow retreating down slope, slow, measured, deliberate. Right then, I knew I needed to leave. No shot was worth staying for. I packed up and started backing down the ridge, every step sounding way too loud in the quiet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the woods behind me stayed perfectly still. Halfway to the truck, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There in the snow clear as day was another set of footprints. Definitely not mine. They were too long, too wide, with a dragging pattern behind them, like whoever made them was walking with uneven weight. And the worst part? They were in the exact path I'd been traveling, then veered off, circling back toward the ridge. I didn't stop. By the time I reached my vehicle, I could barely breathe, partly from running, partly from fear. I reported it to DNR first thing the next morning. They took my statement, logged the location, said they'd send someone to check for illegal hunting activity. A week later, they called back. There was no sign of anyone up there. No shells. No tire tracks. Nothing but old footprints already covered by snow. I still think about that day. I wonder who was out there, and if they were trying to kill me. It's been months, but sometimes when I walk my dog near the woods behind my house, I still feel that same nervous prickle on the back of my neck. I won't hunt alone anymore. Not up there. Honestly. I'm not sure I want to hunt at all. I never liked driving alone through the flatlands. There's something about those endless fields, just you, the sky, and the dark that makes you feel like the last person alive. But that night, I didn't have a choice. My shift ended late. A storm was rolling in from the west, and the highway out of town was closed after a semi overturned on the bridge. I punched a new route into my GPS and let it guide me down a detour I'd never taken before. The rain came in fits and bursts, smearing the windshield no matter how high I cranked the wipers. Lightning flickered on the horizon every few seconds, revealing the looming silhouettes of wind turbines scattered across the plains. Their red warning lights were blinking in sync, vanishing into the low clouds like a heartbeat in the distance. I've always hated those things. My friends tease me about it, say it's just megalophobia, a fear of big man-made structures, but I swear those turbines feel wrong. They hum even when there's no wind. They move when the air is dead still. Anyway, I was about 20 minutes from home when my stomach dropped like someone had stepped on the back of my neck. I couldn't explain it. No sound, no movement, just that primal, animal sense that something bad was about to happen. I slowed down as the gravel road curved left between two dark cornfields. And then I saw something. Something long and black slipped across the road just ahead of my headlights. It didn't turn, it glided. There was no crunch of gravel. No flash of clothing. Just a blur of a shape, human enough for my brain to register it as a person, but warped in all the wrong ways. The limbs were too long. The body was too thin. And the head moved like it wasn't connected by bone at all. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding on the wet road. But the figure was gone, vanished into the cornfield. My headlights caught nothing but thin mist rising off the rows of corn. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until I realized the engine had died. The silence pressed in like a weight. I tried restarting the car once, twice, 3 times before it finally sputtered back to life. I didn't even think about turning around. I just kept driving, hands shaking, every flash of lightning lighting up the turbines like giant sentinels watching me flee. It was terrifying. When I got home, I was hysterical, crying, rambling, all of it. My partner believed me, thankfully. My parents, too. They said my grandparents used to talk about something that moved in those fields near the turbines before the wind farm was even built back in the 80s. A black figure that appeared before storms. Silent. Fast. People called it the Hollow Man. Allegedly, farmers claimed it came from the old well that got sealed off when they built the wind farm, that the constant hum of the turbines had disturbed whatever had been sleeping beneath the soil. Personally, I wrote it off as small-town superstition. Well, until tonight. I was inside finishing some work while my mom, my uncle, and my cousins were out front talking. Suddenly, they went quiet. Then I heard my mom call my name. When I stepped outside, they all looked pale. My uncle said they heard someone yell woohoo. Not in fear, but in this eerie, playful tone. It came from the field just past the driveway. My cousin said the voice was close enough to be human, but the flashlight beams revealed nothing except rows of swaying corn stretching into the dark. A few minutes later, the pizza delivery driver pulled in and she looked like she'd seen a ghost, too. She said something had run across the road just before she reached our house. Tall. Black. Thin as a scarecrow, but fast. It didn't look solid, she said. Like it wasn't really here. She was absolutely shaken, and honestly, I felt bad for her. But the description was exactly the same as mine. Now I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, didn't vanish that night. That instead, it followed me home. My mom thinks the wind turbines attract it, that their constant motion pulls it toward the living like static on an old radio. That's her theory, anyway. My uncle thinks it's a trick of the lightning. Some weird shadow effect. But here's the thing. Every time the wind kicks up now, I hear that hum again. And not from the turbines closer. It's faint, like someone exhaling slowly through the corn. Breathing. Watching. And sometimes, when the red warning lights blink in the distance, I swear one of them blinks black, out of rhythm. Just once. Then never again. I don't know what to think anymore, but I cannot shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It was close to 2 a.m. when the phone rang, not a text, not a notification, but an actual ring, sharp enough to yank me out of half sleep. My husband had already texted earlier, saying he was on his way home. So when I saw his name light up the screen again, my stomach tightened. When I answered, there was only the sound of rain. Then, faintly, his voice. "Can you hear me?" Barely above a whisper. "Yeah, what's wrong?" A pause. Crackling on the line. Then. "Something's not right. I saw I don't even know what I saw. I'm almost home. Just stay up, okay?" The line crackled again and went dead. I stood at the front window, scanning for his headlights through the rain. When they finally appeared, creeping down the gravel drive, relief washed through me. Until he stepped inside. His face was drained of color. Wet hair plastered to his forehead. Eyes wide and unfocused, like someone waking from a nightmare they couldn't fully escape. He didn't take off his jacket. Didn't untie his boots. He just whispered. They weren't people. It took time to get the story out of him, but on the back road near the abandoned rail crossing, the one that connects two farm routes through the marshland, he'd seen figures standing by the tracks. 3 of them. Tall. Thin. Pale but not the color of skin. He said they were paper white, like something that had never been touched by the sun. The tallest appeared to be female. She held something glowing, he couldn't describe it, only that it pulsed softly, like light underwater. When his headlights touched them, all 3 turned their heads at the exact same moment. He said a wave of dread hit him, instantly instinctive, primal, like the way animals freeze just before lightning strikes. He didn't stop the truck. He didn't slow down. He just drove past without looking back, and the feeling didn't leave him until he saw our porch light. The next morning, against my better judgment, we drove back to that spot. The road was slick from the storm, puddles forming between patches of gravel. Near the crossing, the ground was scorched in a strange, perfect circle, darkened as if ash had been soaked into the soil. Even after all that rain, it still looked burnt. That's when an old blue pickup rattled up behind us. The man inside rolled down his window and grinned through a gray beard. "You folks sightseeing?" he asked. We told him we were just looking at something strange from the night before. He seemed amused, nodded toward the crossing, and said, "Oh, that old stretch? Well, you're not the first ones." Then he climbed out without waiting for an answer. His jeans were soaked to the knee, boots caked in mud. "You believe in the sky folk?" he asked. I glanced at my husband. "The what?" The man smiled, like he'd been waiting for that question. "They come through here sometimes. Always have. Used to be the whole field would glow blue when they passed. My dad said it started after the old train line shut down. Something to do with the iron, the ground current, whatever." He motioned for us to follow him up the road to his house, a sagging farmhouse half swallowed by weeds. I hesitated, but my husband, curious as always, agreed. In a small shed behind the house, he pulled out a box of faded photographs. Polaroids, mostly. Grainy shots of the sky above that same crossing, streaks of light cutting through the darkness. He held one close to the bare light bulb swinging above us. "My father took these," he said. "Told me they weren't stars. Said they came down here, walking among us, looking for something buried." I asked if he'd ever seen the pale figures himself. His eyes drifted to the window. "Yeah. Once," he whispered. "When my wife was still alive. She heard them humming before she saw them. Like a song that wasn't meant for ears." When we left, he stood in the rain, waving goodbye, his shape dissolving as our headlights washed over him. That was 2 nights ago. And last night, around the same time 1:58 the motion light on our porch flickered on. No car in the drive. no wind. But when I checked, there were wet footprints leading from the road to the bottom step. Perfectly spaced. Too long to be human. I keep telling myself they were old tracks stretched by rain, distorted, and that's the only reason they're there. But deep down, I know better. But things didn't stop there. A week later, Isa woke us up at around 3 a.m., shaking so badly she could hardly stand. She said the man in the wallpaper had almost stepped out. Her words, not mine. She said his foot was already touching the floor when she screamed, and then he went flat again. We rushed into her room, turned every light on, checked every corner. The wallpaper looked exactly the same, but something felt wrong. The air felt colder near that wall, like standing in front of an open freezer. After that night, she refused to sleep in her room at all. We set up a little mattress for her in our bedroom, thinking it would calm her down, but it only made things stranger. Because 2 nights later, while I was half asleep, I heard it. A faint, slow scratching. Not on the floor. Not on the door. On the walls. A dragging sound, like fingertips gliding across plaster. My husband didn't hear it. He slept through the whole thing. But I sat there frozen, listening as it moved, from the hallway, down toward Isa's room. The next morning, I went to check, telling myself I'd find nothing. But when I touched the wallpaper, the section where the figure was, it felt damp. Like someone had just pressed their hand against it. And when I stepped back, I noticed something I hadn't before. The shape in the wallpaper. The tall, bent figure. Looked clearer. Like the lines had sharpened overnight. And those 2 dark smudges Isa called eyes? They were darker now. I scraped at the wall, thinking maybe it was mold or dirt, but the paint didn't smear or rub off. The color wasn't on the surface. It was inside the wall. That was the moment something clicked in my head, something awful. What if Isa wasn't imagining anything? What if she wasn't misinterpreting patterns? What if something behind the wall was pushing forward? Trying to get out? And the porch light blinking these past 2 nights? What if it wasn't a glitch? What if it was a warning? She started waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning sobbing, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I would find her standing in the hallway, facing a closed door, whispering, "He's behind it." 2 nights ago, my husband finally agreed to sleep in her room just to prove to her there was nothing there. He lasted less than an hour. He came back pale as chalk, swearing he'd heard a faint scraping inside the wall, slow, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across plaster. I wanted to believe he imagined it, but the next morning changed everything. When I went into the room, I saw it. A thin, jagged line running straight down the wallpaper from ceiling to floor, right where the figure's arm always was in Isa's drawings. The paper looked split, bowed out slightly, like something had been pushing from underneath. That night, I refused to leave her alone. I sat in the chair beside her bed until she drifted off, and sometime around midnight, I must have fallen asleep too. I woke to her whispering my name, her voice tiny, trembling. Her eyes were fixed on the wall. The air felt wrong, damp, chilled, heavy. I followed her stare and saw the wallpaper shift. just barely but enough to hear it. A soft rustling, like fabric being stretched. The vines in the pattern curled into new shapes. The face, the one she'd drawn 100 times, looked clearer. The mouth, open wider. I switched on the lamp. Everything froze. The wall looked perfectly normal again. That was last night. This morning I packed a bag for Isa and said we were staying at my sister's. My husband argued, said we were feeding into the fear, but while we talked, Isa was upstairs. She came down holding another drawing. Not of her room this time, but of the kitchen. The three of us sitting at the table, and behind us, rising huge across the wallpaper, a tall figure with its head bent low, so low it was almost touching mine. That was it for me. I'm not going back inside that house. I don't know whether something is in those walls or if our fear made something take shape, but the longer we stayed, the more the house felt awake. A presence. A pressure. A watching. And that split in the wallpaper, it wasn't there until a few days ago. I don't have an explanation. But when I left the house this afternoon, I swear I saw the wallpaper near the ceiling bulge. Just slightly, like something was pushing against it. We'll be selling the house soon. I don't care what we lose. I'm never going back. I don't talk about this much anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because no one believes me. The memories come back in flashes, the groan of an old floorboard, the smell of lemon polish, and that voice low, rough, too close. I was maybe 9 or 10. My mother used to visit an elderly woman named Mrs. Hanley, who lived alone on a huge property at the edge of town. The kind of house that looked older than the road that led to it. My mother brought her groceries every couple of weeks, and I'd tag along because I hated being home alone. The house was strange, not messy, not abandoned, just still. Too still. Like everything was arranged for guests who never arrived. A staircase wrapped the front hall, polished wood gleaming like it had been wiped down minutes before. The steps were oddly steep, each one feeling slightly higher than the one before. For some reason, I felt drawn up them. My mother was deep in conversation with Mrs. Hanley in the kitchen, so I slipped away. I was halfway up when I heard it. "Hey, son, don't go up there." The voice came from above me, deep, gravelly, like someone whispering through a sore throat. I looked up, and there he was, a tall man standing on the landing. Suspenders. A wide brim hat shadowing most of his face. One hand on the railing, the other hidden behind him. "Too tall for you," he said. "You'll fall. And there won't be nobody to catch you." He didn't sound angry, or gentle. Just, certain. Like he wasn't warning me, just stating what was going to happen. I muttered an apology and hurried down. When I told my mother later, she said there was nobody else in the house. Mrs. Hanley had no visitors. I tried convincing myself I imagined him, but I could still hear that rough whisper all the way home. Years passed. Mrs. Hanley died while I was in college. I hadn't thought about that house in forever until her name came up at a small memorial service. Her niece mentioned selling the property. I asked what they were doing with the upstairs. She frowned. "Upstairs? There is no upstairs." I must have looked confused, because she explained. The staircase had been closed off, sealed decades earlier. Ever since her grandfather fell there and broke his neck. The steps led nowhere now, just a sealed landing with a crawl space to the attic. They kept it that way for sentimental reasons, she said, though she admitted that the whole setup gave her the creeps. She even laughed and said, "We joke that you can still hear him pacing up there sometimes." I wanted to laugh with her. I couldn't. Because I still remembered that man. The hat. The way he leaned on the rail. The thick scent of dust and old tobacco that clung to the air after he spoke. And I remembered the sound that came before he appeared, the soft creak of a floorboard directly above me. A sound that shouldn't have existed if the landing had truly been sealed for decades. Last month, for the first time in years, I drove past that property. The new owners had repainted the siding, fixed the porch, cleaned up the yard. The house looked almost cheerful now. But as I slowed near the gate, something in the upper window caught my eye. Movement. I gripped the wheel so hard my fingers went numb. A shadow at first, then clearer, the shape of a tall man standing perfectly still behind the glass. Broad-shouldered. Hat brim dipped low exactly the way I remembered him. I told myself it had to be a worker, a contractor, somebody renovating the place. But as I kept driving, eyes still locked on that window, the figure didn't move once. Not an inch. Just watched. As I rounded the corner, a shudder crawled over me, cold, familiar, and I remembered how he'd told me I'd fall. And how absolutely certain he had sounded. My brother had planned the trip months ahead, but when he came down with the flu, he offered me his camping permit. I'd been burned out, too much city noise, too many restless nights, so the idea of vanishing into the woods for a few days sounded perfect. 2 friends came along. Marcus, who'd been camping since he could walk, and David, who packed enough equipment to survive the apocalypse. We drove north until the road thinned to gravel, then hiked a few miles into the back country along a nameless lake. The place felt untouched, still, cold, almost artificial in its silence. After dark, the air chilled enough to turn your breath white. By the time the fire burned down to embers, the only sound left was the slow lapping of the water. It wasn't a comforting silence. It was the kind that makes your ears ring. The first night passed fine. Peaceful, even except for one thing. Around dawn, half awake, I stepped out to use the tree line, and across the lake, in the fog, I saw shapes. 6, maybe 7. Tall, thin, unmoving. Just dark silhouettes near the trees. I told myself they were stumps or boulders, though they were spaced too evenly for that. And when the fog lifted an hour later, every shape was gone. I brushed it off. Fog plays tricks. The second night fell the same way. Fire, cheap whiskey, laughter that echoed a little too wide in the dark. Around midnight, the temperature dropped hard. The fire sputtered out. We crawled into our tents, zipped them shut loudly, too loudly in all that nothingness. Sometime deep in the night, a sound pulled me awake. Movement. Not the soft rustle of an animal. This was slow. Heavy. Deliberate. One step. A pause. Another step. My heartbeat thudded in my throat. Whatever it was, it paced along the edge of our campsite just outside the tents. I whispered Marcus's name. From my right came his groggy, barely awake reply. Yeah. The footsteps stopped. The silence after was suffocating. Thick enough to feel. Then a new sound. Click. 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 3 sharp knocks like stones tapped together. Perfectly spaced. A pause. Then again. Click. 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 The sound moved slowly, circling all 3 tents. A full, deliberate loop. Never rushing. Never stumbling. Just tracing the perimeter. Then, just as slowly, it drifted away toward the tree line. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, listening to the woods breathe, waiting for it to come back. When dawn finally came, everything looked normal. Too normal. The woods were still, untouched. The lake was smooth as glass. But the firewood we'd half stacked the night before was gone, not scattered, not moved, gone. And there were no animal tracks anywhere in the soft dirt around camp. Except for one thing. A set of bare footprints leading from the tree line to the water's edge. Large. Larger than any of ours. Wide and perfectly straight, as if the thing that made them didn't bend at the ankle at all. One of those prints overlapped one of my boot impressions from the night before, and that was the one closest to my tent. It had been standing right outside. We didn't talk much. We just packed up and left. Marcus joked weakly about beavers smacking their tails, but he didn't believe it. None of us did. By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself it was exhaustion. Almost. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., I woke in my apartment with that same crawling sense of wrongness. The building was silent, except for it. Click. 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 A pause. Then 3 more taps. Then 3 more. The exact rhythm from the woods. But this time, it was coming from outside my window, the window facing the alley. I live on the 3rd floor. I didn't move. I just lay there listening as the clicking circled the building. Deliberate. Patient. Like someone walking the perimeter of a fence. I tried to blame the pipes, or the metal contracting in the cold, but deep down I knew. Those weren't mechanical sounds. They were footsteps. And taps. The next morning, I checked the street. Nothing. No stones. No tracks. No sign that anything had passed through the alley at all. That was 5 nights ago. It's happened twice since then, always between 2 and 4 a.m. The last time, I swear the sound came from inside the apartment hallway. When I opened the door, there was nothing there. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something really followed me home. I barely sleep. I keep the lights on. It doesn't help. And every night, I think about those shapes across the lake, those perfectly spaced figures facing us through the fog. How they didn't move until sunrise. How they watched. If anyone has ever experienced something like this, something that doesn't stay in the woods, I would honestly appreciate any advice. I don't know how long something like this can follow you before it stops being a creature of the forest and becomes something else. This all started with a stupid idea, really. My ex and I were driving the back roads outside of town when we pulled into a stretch of public land, prairie, low forest, a meandering river that shimmered between the reeds like something half asleep. A friend of his, maybe 20, local kid, tagged along. He said he used to fish for catfish along this same river when he was little. We parked where the dirt lot met the grass and headed out just before dusk. The trail hugged the river and the tree line, the world around us quiet and clean. Insects droned softly. The water hissed over stones. Somewhere far off, power lines hummed. But the quiet felt heavy. Like sound wasn't echoing, it was being absorbed. Maybe that's why we started yelling. It began as a joke, a sharp, shrill whoop from my ex that echoed beautifully through the trees. I laughed and answered back. Soon we were both whooping nonsense calls, mimicking the dramatic war cries you hear in old movies. Even the friend joined in briefly. But he cut it short after a minute, said his knee was acting up, and headed back to the car. We waved him off, still laughing. But once he disappeared around the bend, the quiet slammed back into place. Sudden. Dense. We kept walking, drifting off the trail, letting curiosity guide us. The river was our anchor, its dark current gliding silently beside us. The trees thinned into tall, crooked silhouettes. Twilight washed everything violet. Then a deer burst across our path. A gray blur exploding from the undergrowth, leaping over a fallen log and vanishing into the dark with a violent crash. We froze. Then from somewhere behind us, a sound. Our sound. The exact same call we'd done earlier. Same pitch. Same timing. Not close, not far, but unmistakably human. But none of us made it. At first I thought he was hurt. Anyone would've. He wasn't moving except for the tiny quiver of his jaw as he whispered whatever those broken words were. His clothes looked old, too old. Like he'd been out there longer than any sane person could survive. One of our runners asked if he needed help, but the man didn't react. He didn't even look at the person speaking. His gaze stayed locked straight ahead, at me. And then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. A slow, stretched, awful thing that didn't match the emptiness in his eyes. The two runners behind me came up beside us, and when their flashlights hit him at the same time, he finally moved. But not like someone standing up. His body unfolded, limbs shifting with this stiff, unnatural precision, like they were remembering the steps to a dance he hadn't practiced in decades. As he rose, the leaves that had been draped over him slid off in clumps, and the smell that came out of them made my stomach twist. Wet soil, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. None of us spoke. None of us breathed. He stepped forward. Not fast. Not slow. Just, deliberate. Our group instinctively backed up, but nobody wanted to break into a run. You could feel it in the air, that wrongness that tells every instinct you have that running would make it worse. Then he murmured something. A single sentence, perfectly clear this time. It's still out there. His voice cracked like dead bark snapping. We asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer. He just turned his head toward the tree line slowly, painfully, and stared into the darkness like he expected something to crawl out of it any second. A moment later, the forest behind us rustled. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something heavy. Calculated. Moving with purpose. That broke us. Someone yelled "Go!" and the whole group started sprinting along the narrow edge of the lake, flashlights shaking wildly in the dark. The leaves felt louder under our feet than they should have been, every step echoing like we were being chased even when I didn't dare turn around to check if we actually were. When we finally made it to the trailhead, sweating, gasping, half in tears, the cold hit us harder than the run. It felt like something had followed us all the way to the parking lot, something we couldn't see, but that could definitely see us. We waited for 10 minutes, 20, just staring down the empty path. The old man never appeared. No footsteps. No breathing. No sign that he had ever been there at all. We called the rangers the next morning, but their search turned up nothing. No man. No tracks. Not even the piles of leaves he'd covered himself with. The trail looked untrodden. Undisturbed. Like it had swallowed him whole. None of us ever did another night run again after that. The group kind of fell apart quietly. We'd start talking about restarting in the spring, but every time the idea came up, someone would go quiet and shake their head. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I think about the whisper he muttered before he stood up. That warning. It's still out there. And sometimes, when the wind blows across the lake near my apartment, I swear I hear leaves shifting in the dark. Not rustling. Moving. For a moment, I really did think he might have been injured. Maybe lost. Maybe confused. Anything normal. But then the reality hit me like a splash of freezing water. We were deep in the woods at night. He was alone. And we had no idea if he was armed. One gun. One narrow trail. 6 of us bunched together with nowhere to scatter. If he wanted to hurt someone, we'd never stand a chance. His whispering kept going, this strange, looping cadence like chanting from inside a dream he couldn't wake up from. His eyes didn't track us. His hands didn't fidget. His face didn't change. He looked like a man whose mind had slipped somewhere far, far away. To this day, I can still hear the rhythm of that muttering if I think about it too long, like something old and broken replaying itself on a loop. The moment someone behind me whispered, "Run," everything snapped. We bolted. Adrenaline blasted through my veins like wildfire. The leaves sounded like firecrackers under our shoes. Branches whipped our arms. The trail twisted beneath the beams of our flashlights while the pounding of footsteps, or maybe it was just our own, echoed across the still surface of the lake beside us. Every instinct I had screamed the same thing. Don't stop. Don't look back. By the time we tore out of the trail and into the clearing near the trailhead, I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. My lungs burned. My mind kept flashing through every worst-case scenario. And even though the parking lot was lit, I kept staring at the tree line, convinced that something was about to step out of it. We didn't go back. We didn't report it. We didn't even try to figure out who he was. But that image. A man buried in leaves, whispering to ghosts only he could see. That has stayed with me longer than any fear should. I used to live out in the kind of quiet most people romanticize. Long gravel road. A sagging old mobile home. And behind my fence an ocean of black trees that went on for miles. It wasn't a bad life. I'd finish my night shift at the repair shop, drive home half asleep, smoke too much, and settle into the kind of silence people write poems about. What I didn't know then is that silence isn't always calm. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it means something is listening. It was late autumn when it started. Same routine as always. I stepped outside for a smoke. No moon that night, just the soft halo from my porch light spilling over the yard and fading into the forest. The crickets were screaming, the frogs down by the creek even louder. And then everything stopped. Instantly. No fade out. No slowing. 1 second, the night was alive. The next, it was a vacuum. Before I could even register what was happening, something bright bloomed between the trees. Not a flashlight. Not headlights. Not anything that moved or flickered. It hovered perfectly still, a flat, glowing disk floating between the trunks. The light wasn't shining outward. It was as if it was pushing the darkness away, peeling it back. The bark of the trees turned stark white. The air itself looked pale and washed out. My cigarette burned all the way down between my fingers while I stared, frozen. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Not faded. Not drifted. Just snuffed out. Like someone flicked a switch. And somehow, the silence after that light vanished was worse than the light itself. It felt wrong, like the entire tree line had sucked in a breath and forgotten how to exhale. I backed inside, locked the door twice, and spent the rest of the night convincing myself there had to be a normal explanation, a reflection, a hunter's lamp, fog-bending light, anything human. But when I finally drifted off, my dreams disagreed. I dreamt I was standing at the sliding glass door behind my house. Beyond my reflection, in the pool of porch light, sat a coyote. Perfectly still. It didn't bare its teeth. It didn't twitch. It just stared. Its eyes weren't animal eyes, they were a flat, unsettling human brown. And it breathed slow, too slow, like it was waiting for me to open the door. I jolted awake with my heart slamming against my ribs. I told myself it was just a nightmare. But when I stepped outside the next morning, frost crackling beneath my boots, the world felt smaller, compressed, watched. And there it was. Sitting in the exact same spot as in my dream. Same shape. Same posture. Same unnatural stillness. A coyote or something wearing the shape of one. I know how insane that sounds, but the look in its eyes wasn't animal. It was aware. Measuring. Almost expectant. It tilted its head toward the trees, almost like a gesture. And then it trotted off without a sound, disappearing as if the forest swallowed it whole. After that day, the woods never sounded the same again. The crickets returned, but their rhythm was wrong. Every now and then the heavy quiet would fall again, those unnatural pockets of silence like the world was glitching. And then came the last night. I remember because sleep wouldn't come. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the window cracked open, the air thick with that pre-rain smell. Then, that silence hit again. Not emptiness. Pressure. Like the quiet had weight. And then I felt it. Something touched my ankle. At first I thought it was a muscle spasm. Then actual fingers wrapped around my leg. My eyes flew open, but the rest of me wouldn't move. I was pinned, frozen, while the weight of something pressed down on my chest. Its breath was slow, ragged, almost curious. Its face hovered inches from mine, but all I could see was darkness like the air itself bent around it. And beneath its breathing, I heard it. A clicking. Soft. Rhythmic. A tongue against teeth. When the paralysis finally snapped, I shot upright. The room was empty. But the window was wide open. And the air outside shimmered faintly like heat rising off asphalt even though the night was cold. 3 hours had passed. To me, it had been seconds. I moved out 2 weeks later. Told everyone it was financial. The truth is, I never slept another night in that house. That was 6 years ago. And even now, when I let myself remember, I can still feel that weight pressing on my chest. For the longest time I told myself whatever appeared that night came from above a craft, a light, something extraterrestrial. These days, I'm not so sure. I think it came from the trees. Or from the earth beneath them. Not the sky. When I think back to that year, the strangest part isn't the horror, it's how perfectly ordinary everything felt, right up until the moment it wasn't. I was living in D.C., drowning in congressional office hours, sprinting through caffeine-soaked days and collapsing into quiet nights where my thoughts finally had space to echo. That's when I started using dating apps, not out of romance, but out of loneliness in disguise. That's when I met him. He called himself Cal. Not his real name, but close enough. His profile was plain. Clean-cut. Southern. Confident in that polished way people get when they're practiced at being charming. He messaged me first. His tone was polite, almost too polite. A little stiff, a little rehearsed, like someone practicing human conversations instead of having them. But I still responded. For weeks, he kept asking to meet. And every time, I told him I couldn't. I wasn't lying, my office practically had me chained to my desk, but he stayed persistent in that gentle, almost disarming way that makes you start feeling unreasonable. He'd say things like, "You deserve a break, even if it's just dinner." Or, "I'll wait outside your building. You won't have to lift a finger." I should have felt the pressure back then. But I convinced myself he was just eager. When I finally said yes, it was raining thin, misty drizzle clinging to our clothes without soaking them. He was already standing there when I arrived. I recognized him instantly from his photos, but something wasn't right. His eyes didn't match his smile. They lingered too long. They studied me. Not admiration, analysis. Dinner was oddly normal. Almost boring, except his questions were strangely pointed. Where I lived. Where I parked. If I lived alone. I kept redirecting, deflecting years of practiced politeness working overtime. But one moment is burned into my memory. I laughed at something he said and he just froze. Completely still. Like the sound startled him. Then he reached across the table and brushed a piece of hair from my face, even though there wasn't one. That was the moment I knew I needed to leave. He insisted on one drink next door, and when I said no, he didn't argue. He just smiled and murmured, "You'll change your mind." That smile should have sent me running. Instead, I made the mistake of following him to the bar. He ordered for me before I spoke. And every time I hinted that I had to go, he acted like he didn't hear it at all. When I finally pretended to take a work call, he tilted his head almost amused and whispered, "You're good at lying when you're afraid." The way he said it, not a threat, not angry, just stating a fact. Like he was impressed. Eventually, I managed to escape. He insisted on calling me a ride, and I was too mentally drained to argue. So I gave him a fake address a few blocks from my real apartment. When we pulled up, he got out with me. Before I could react, he grabbed my shoulders and kissed me. It wasn't romantic. It was deliberate possession, not affection. When I pushed him away, he looked confused. Not angry. Confused. As if I had done something wrong. I ran home under the streetlights, terrified he would follow. The second the door clicked shut behind me, I felt the silence slam down heavy, suffocating. You don't realize how loud safety feels, until it's gone. I told myself it was over. That night, he sent dozens of messages. The next day hundreds. Some sweet. Some pleading. Some sounding like he was imitating what he thought affection should sound like. I stopped responding. 3 days later, security called my office, said a package with my name was being screened. I hadn't ordered anything, but I didn't think much of it. When it arrived, it was a bouquet of deep red roses tied with a black ribbon. Not store-bought ones. Wild roses. Crooked, uneven stems. Cut by hand. There was a card. "You shouldn't have lied about where you live." I sat there frozen, staring at those words until they blurred. I never told anyone how badly that shook me. Not my roommates. Not my co-workers. I threw the flowers away. Deleted the app. But it didn't stop. Over the next few months, things started happening. Small things at first. Things I tried to rationalize. Things I wanted to believe were coincidences. But they weren't. The blinds would be open when I came home. Even though I always kept them closed. I'd find the porch light unscrewed. Once, I came home to my front door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but I swear I smelled his cologne lingering in the hallway. That's when I moved. New job. New city. New number. And for a while, I convinced myself that everything I'd experienced was just a string of unsettling coincidences. Until last year. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I answered and a man's voice said, "You're still good at lying when you're afraid." Then the line went dead. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. Because I had never told another soul he'd said that to me. Not once. So I knew without a doubt it was him. I've moved again. A different state this time. Logically, I believe I'm safe, but I'd be lying if I said the paranoia isn't still there. I check the locks constantly. I keep the curtains closed. And sometimes, in those dead silent moments at night, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there. That it's only a matter of time before he finds me again. When I first moved into this little house on the edge of town, it was the quiet I loved most. No traffic. No neighbors arguing. No city hum vibrating through the walls. Just open space, and me. After a messy breakup, solitude sounded like medicine. It wasn't totally isolated, just a few scattered homes along a gravel road, but my backyard met a wall of untouched forest. From my bedroom window, you could see nothing but dense, dark trees and the ghostly outline of a hill behind them. After a few months, I downloaded a dating app. Harmless distraction, I told myself. A little reminder that other humans existed. That's how I met L. His profile was plain. Pictures with a dog. A line about working in construction. A quote about being a hopeless romantic. It had that intentionally ordinary feel, like he wanted to seem forgettable. He messaged me first, and the conversation flowed easily. After a few days, he suggested meeting at a small pub near my house. I said yes, mostly because I was tired of hearing my own voice echo in empty rooms. He was already sitting there when I arrived. Jacket on the chair, 2 drinks waiting. He smiled when he saw me. A wide smile. All teeth. No warmth. Still. I sat down. Maybe he was just nervous. He looked slightly different from his photos, not misleading, just softer around the edges somehow. Dinner went fine, smooth, polite, casual. But something felt off. An intensity behind his calmness. A focus that didn't feel normal. When I mentioned I'd walk to the pub, he asked for my street name, in case he ever needed to drop something by. I laughed it off, told him I never give my address to people. Halfway home, I realized I'd left my house keys on the table. Cursing myself, I turned back. And saw him standing under a streetlight at the corner. Just standing there. Holding something that glinted in his hand. I was about to bring these to you, he said, lifting my keys. I took them, thanked him, and watched him walk away into the dark. That night, I dreamt of footsteps across my ceiling. Not running. Not pacing. Just slow, careful steps. As if someone was trying not to be heard. I woke to silence. Told myself it was just a dream. Told myself my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Days passed, and he texted a few more times. I replied once or twice, then stopped. I told myself I was just busy, but the truth was simpler. The thought of him made my stomach twist. There was something wrong in his messages. The timing, the way he phrased things, the way it felt like he somehow already knew what I was doing. Then one night, while I was soaking in the bath, I got a text. "Don't fall asleep in there." My phone slipped into the water. I scrambled out, dripping, heart hammering. When I opened the bathroom door, the hallway was empty. The next few nights were worse. I'd wake to faint noises. A soft thud. A shift. Something dragging lightly across wood. Sounds I couldn't excuse anymore as the house settling. Once I found crumbs across the counter that hadn't been there before. Another time, a glass sat on the wrong shelf. Small things just enough to keep me uneasy. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Until the night the truth stepped out of the shadows. I was lying in bed, lights off, drifting toward sleep when my phone buzzed. "You move in your sleep." Before I could even process the words, another sound followed. A notification. Not from my phone. From somewhere else inside my room. The buzzing was faint, muffled, coming from my wardrobe. I didn't think. I grabbed the small knife on my bedside table and bolted for the front door. Behind me, I heard it. The slow, deliberate creak of the wardrobe door opening. Followed by footsteps. Heavy ones. Running after me. I sprinted barefoot into the night, half-dressed, screaming for help. A neighbor came out and called the police. They found him in my attic. He'd built himself a little nest between the beams. Blankets, food containers, water bottles, and photographs. Hundreds of Polaroids. Me brushing my teeth. Me sleeping. Me sitting on the couch. Some were taken from impossible angles. Almost like from above, through cracks in the ceiling. And the worst part? None of them were recent. The newest was from a week before I called the police. They told me he'd been living up there far longer than 2 weeks. When I returned to pack my things, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. My skin crawled walking through it. Dust smudges near the vents, finger marks. Hairline cracks in the ceiling I'd ignored suddenly looked like places someone had watched through. Little objects slightly out of place, small patterns I'd dismissed now fitting together far too perfectly. I moved out the next day. I haven't heard from him since. I don't usually talk about that night. It's been over 20 years, and still, every time I tell the story, a chill runs down my spine. Back in the early 2000s, I was living just outside Felton, working odd jobs, driving too much, sleeping too little. Most weekends I'd stay too long at my girlfriend's place in Santa Cruz. Always telling myself one more coffee, one more song. That night was no different. I left around midnight. Maybe closer to 1. The streets were empty, fog folding low over the street lamps, the air smelling of wet asphalt and ozone. I turned onto Graham Hill Road. A stretch I'd driven so often I barely needed to think about it. That's when I saw the truck. Its tail lights were fuzzy through the mist. We were both taking the incline near the cemetery. The part where the trees close in tight and the shoulder disappears. The truck drifted left. Then again harder, this time its tires screeching against the road. I tapped my brakes thinking drunk driver. And that's when I saw it. Something was crouched low by the roadside. Right at the divide between pavement and grass. At first, it looked like a person. A pale shape folded in on itself. Maybe injured. Maybe a crash victim. But then it straightened. not in a human way. It unfolded, joints bending wrong, like it was remembering the motion too late. My headlights swept across it. It was small, maybe 5 feet tall if fully upright. Wearing a thin, light-colored dress. Long, wet-looking hair clung to its shoulders. But the worst part wasn't how it looked. It was how it moved. It didn't stand up. It assembled itself. Piece by piece. When its head lifted, its face tilted far too high. Mouth stretched open, no sound at all. Just silence. And then it turned toward me. My headlights passed over its face. And its eyes didn't reflect anything. No shine. No glare. Just pits. Holes where light should have been. My heart punched into my throat. I swerved so hard I felt the wheel jolt. Felt something brush the side of the car. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, nothing. The road behind me was empty. The truck ahead sped up fast, its tail lights disappearing into the curve. I wanted to catch up. I needed someone else, anyone, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes, trying to breathe. I kept telling myself it was fog, shadows, exhaustion, anything. But I couldn't shake the image of those eyes. Those hollow black pits tracking me long after I'd driven past. That should have been the end of it. But about a week later, something strange happened. I was leaving for work early one morning just before sunrise. The fog was back, thicker than before, clinging to the trees like wet cotton. I got into my car, went to turn on the heater, and that's when I noticed it. Something on the windshield. Faint smears. Like fingerprints. But way too high. Pressed right near the roof line. Someone would have had to stand on the hood to leave them there, and the idea of someone or something being that close to my face while I slept inside. I tried not to think about it. A few nights later, I had this dream. I was back on Graham Hill Road. Fog so thick I could barely see 2 feet ahead. Somewhere out there, I heard the low, steady whine of an engine idling. So I followed it. And when I reached the bend, I saw a figure kneeling right in the middle of the lane. When it lifted its head, I shot awake screaming. For a while after that, I avoided that road entirely. I'd take the long way home, add half an hour to my drive, anything but pass through that stretch again. I didn't tell anyone why. I mean, who would believe me? Years passed. I moved away. Started a new life. A family. But every now and then I'd hear bits of local talk, stories about a woman seen walking that road near the cemetery. Sometimes kneeling near the shoulder. Sometimes standing dead center in the lane. They called her the White Woman, some old ghost legend from the 60s. But what I saw, that wasn't a woman. It wasn't anything human. I know that. Last winter, I had to drive that way again. I thought I was ready. The road hadn't changed at all, same trees, same sharp turns, same suffocating quiet. As I approached the stretch near the cemetery, my radio started to hiss. Just static. Loud, violent static. And then through the fog, I saw it. The faint outline of a truck ahead of me. An old model. Same shape. Same speed. I know how insane that sounds, but I swear. It looked exactly like the one from that night. But this time, I didn't slow down. I didn't look toward the shoulder. I didn't even blink. I kept my eyes locked on the tail light until the road finally straightened out and the fog began to thin. After that, I took a different route home. And I haven't been back there since. I don't ever plan to. Not after what I saw on Graham Hill Road.